All right. Good morning, young scholars. Hello, YouTube. So today we're going to get further into CSS. Last class we did some stuff with, text and color and just kind of exploring what different things you can change with CSS. All that stuff is like, stuff that's fairly easy for you to look up on your own. Go to CSS Tricks or wherever, and as long as you have a sense of what kinds of things CSS does, then you can always just look up, search, how do I make stuff italics? Okay, so I'm not too worried about you memorizing any of those kinds of CSS properties like that. What we're going to talk about today, though, is a fundamental core concept of CSS. And it's probably one of the most important things for you to have a good understanding of as we are building up to creating layouts with CSS, okay? So all of this is going somewhere. We're going to eventually be getting into grid and flexbox and making really fancy layouts, responsive design, and all that. But this is really where the discussion about layout starts and where you are going to be using this concept of the box model just throughout everything you do from here on out. Okay, so you may already be familiar with some of this, but maybe, I don't know, have you talked about the box? Have you heard that term before, the box model? No? Okay. So here it is. All right, there's a box. That box is the content. Okay. And we have another box. That box is the padding. And we have another box. That's the border, sorry. Border. And yet another box. We'll go with orange. And that is the margin. Okay, so you've probably heard these terms before. You might have changed the padding or the border of something with CSS, right? So this concept of how these are layered, starting with content, padding, border, margin, is very important to just embed in your brain. All right, so let's say it together. Content, padding, border, margin. All right, one more time. That was a lie. We're going to do it more than one more time. Ready? Another time. Content, padding, border, margin. Content, padding, border, margin. Content, padding, border, margin. Okay, good. Super duper important to know that. Okay, so let's take a look at what that actually means. There we go. Okay, so if you're just tuning in on YouTube, I have the class Make This HTML Document here. That's what we're going to be working with, so if you want to pause the video and go ahead and make that file for yourself. Just an H1 and a paragraph. Okay, so let's go ahead and open this page in the browser. And I want you today to open this in Firefox because we're going to be using some of the Firefox dev tools, okay? And the symbol for Firefox is this one down here in the middle. And Adam, you can hover over these actually and it will tell you which browser it is. It's that cute little fox. So go ahead and click that to open this in Firefox. Okay, and there's our heading and our paragraph. Nothing out of the ordinary there. So in order to actually see what's going on with our box model here, let's add some styles. So we'll just use an internal style sheet here. So go ahead and create that. And we're going to add a background color to this. We'll do it both to the H1 and to the paragraph. An easy way to do both at once, instead of having two separate rules, one for H1 and one from paragraphs, you can actually select multiple elements by separating them with a comma. So we can say H1, comma, P, and then create our curly brackets. And so any declarations we make here will apply to both paragraphs and H1s. Okay? So let's go ahead and add a background color. I'll try to choose something that will actually show up well on the projector. Yeah, okay. And just so the text is easier to see, I'm going to make the text white. All right. Okay. And when you go back to the browser, and you don't have to click this again, what you can do is just go back to the browser that you already have it open in, and then just hit refresh, or Control-R to refresh to see the changes. So you should now see these two elements have a background color. What do you notice about that that might be like a little bit unexpected? Yes, good. It goes all the way across the full width of the page. There's a little bit of space on either side, but it goes all the way across the whole width of the page, even though the content, or the amount of text that we have, only takes up that much. Okay. Anything else that you can observe from that? What about the height of those elements? Okay. So you notice that there is some space around them already, some space between them, and space like above the H1. But the height of the actual element itself, as opposed to the width, where the width takes up all the space that it can, the height is only the height of the content. It's only as high as it needs to be to account for the amount of text there. Let's add a little bit more to our paragraph, so we have a longer paragraph. So again, in Atom, you can just start typing lorem, hit enter. We'll put in some lorem text there, just so we have a bigger amount of text. And then we'll refresh that. Okay. And you'll notice that these are some things that we kind of take for granted, that unlike in Atom, where at first when we had like one big long line of text, it went all the way and kept going, so that like you would have to like scroll horizontally to see the whole thing. In a browser, the browser just automatically wraps the text when it gets to the edge of the width there, which is really nice, because if it didn't do that, we'd have to keep horizontally scrolling, which is a really pain in the butt. Not only that, but if we change the width of the browser window, if we resize the window, then the text keeps updating like with a new wrap point. So it keeps wrapping so that text always fits in within the width there. Okay? So that's a really nice feature of just bare bones HTML. This is the default behavior. So what we have here is a fluid website. Without doing any CSS at all, we have a fluid website. Fluid means that you can resize the browser, and that content will change size and always fit within the available space that we have. Okay. So that's really, really cool. And we want to take advantage of that as much as we can. The other thing to note that we tend to take for granted is that the paragraph is on a separate line than the H1, right? We have the H1, and then when we start a paragraph, it's always going to start on a new line. And if we create another paragraph after that, that will start on a new line, okay? Again, so that's the default behavior, is that these elements always create their own line. That's not the case for all elements. So if we put in here, for example, an emphasis element. So the box model is important. So let's say somebody's trying to tell us the box model is not important. And so we want to say the box model is important. So we're putting emphasis on the word is, like so. And when we refresh the page now, I'll zoom in here. You can see that this word is in italics to indicate that it has emphasis, but it doesn't create a new line, right? It just flows in line with the rest of the text that's around it, okay? And it doesn't take up any more space than the space of the text inside it. So the difference between these elements is their display value. These elements, by default, H1, paragraphs, they have a display value of block. So they're like blocks, like stacking blocks on a page. Each one takes up a new line on the page. The M element and other elements like strong and the anchor tag and things like that, those elements have a display value of inline. Okay, so we have block elements and we have inline elements. Okay, so that's another important concept to understand. Okay, so the way that browsers naturally display this stuff without all the stuff we just talked about, how the text, adjusts to the width and the block elements take up the full width that they have available to them, and the block level elements, stacking, all of that stuff, the way that the browser naturally displays it, we call that flow. That's flow layout, F-L-O-W, okay? Or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as normal flow, okay? So when we get into layout, you'll have some different options available to you. Flow, grid, flexbox, and column, or multi-column. Each of these has a different purpose and a different use case and different reasons why you might want to use one over the other. But again, flow is what just naturally happens without going into any of these other layout modes. And if we have a really good, strong understanding of flow layout, then we can do a lot with that and use it where it's appropriate, where we don't have to unnecessarily go into these other layout modes, okay? And when you're building a website, you want to think about HTML and CSS and JavaScript and everything as these kind of layers of enhancement that you're putting on the website, So the base like structure and content of the site, as we talked about, is your HTML. Ideally, your page should still work, be functional, be legible with just the HTML, without any CSS or JavaScript at all. It should all pretty much still have bare bones functionality and be legible, okay? And so flow is that's what we're working with there. With just HTML, we're working with flow layout. So let's see what we can do with flow layout to kind of adjust things a little bit to make things look a little bit better on here. Because right now this doesn't look great, right? So that's where the box model comes in as far as what we can do to adjust the spacing of things. We're not getting into other layout modes. We're still working in flow layout, but we can use the box model to adjust how things are spaced on the page. All right. So again, the box model is content, padding, border, margin. Very good. There it is. Content, padding, border, margin. Okay. So what we are seeing here with our background color, I'm going to go back to normal zoom level here. What we're seeing here is the content area. Okay, that's what by putting a background color on there, it kind of shows we can actually see it. So that's the content area. So again, default is the content area is going to take up the full width of its parent, which is in this case is the body. So let's talk about padding. So you can think of each of these, padding, border, margin, as just another layer of space that we can put around the content. Each one of them has kind of different qualities, different properties that we can tweak. But at the most abstract level, these are just layers of space, right, that we're putting around the content. So the first layer of space that we can put around the content is padding. So let's go ahead and add padding to our elements. You guys have done this before? Yes? You've used padding before? Okay. So probably know that here inside our declaration block for our H1 or paragraph, we can create a new line. Whoops. We can write padding, colon, and then what would the value be? Or what would be a possible value? A percent. A pixel value. Good. Yeah, any what we call in CSS a length value. Yes, you can. CSS does have. The question was, would an inch work? If you didn't hear that, I'm recording. CSS does have like physical units, like inch, centimeter, etc. Those would be used for if you can actually use CSS to create layouts for print. So like if somebody like printed off the web page, or you could use CSS to like lay out like a book for printing. So you're not going to use like inch or centimeter or anything typically for screen-based things. But we would use something like pixel or percent. All of those units are what's referred to as length values in CSS. So anything that is a length value. So there are more. There's ems, etc. So for now, let's just stick with pixels because it's probably more comfortable for you at this point. So we need a pixel value. Let's just put in a number here. We'll try 20 pixels. And save. And refresh. And that looks a lot better. let me undo what I did so we can just look at that difference one more time. So there's no padding. Padding is really, really important because you generally don't want to have your text content like butted right up against the edge of the area there with like the background color, or if you have a border. So you want to give your text room to breathe. So padding comes in very handy for that. So I'll put the padding back on there. Padding 20 pixels. What do you notice about that? What's that? You say it looks better? Yeah.
It's easier to read the text.
Okay, it's easier to read the text, yeah. What do you notice about like the like where the padding has been applied? Yeah, it applied to both the H1 and the paragraph because we're selecting both of those. And it's also applying padding to every side of the element. So we have 20 pixels of padding on the left, on the top, on the bottom, on the right. It's hard to tell on the right because the text wraps, but it's there. And you can actually see this by using your dev tools in Firefox. Every browser has dev tools, but Firefox by far has the best dev tools. So we're going to use Firefox. And to access the dev tools, there's a shortcut for it, but you can just right-click anywhere on the page. So go ahead and right-click on the paragraph, and then click Inspect Element. And mine is set to be a pop-out window. Let me change that. Dock to bottom.
We can do that with F12, right?
What's that?
We can do that with
F12?
F12.
I'm not sure.
I think in Chrome you can. I'm not sure.
Yes. Yeah. F12 is a shortcut. I usually do Control-Shift-I, which now that I know the F12 works, I'll probably just use F12. So that's handy. If you do it this way, if you right-click and on an element and then inspect element, then that element will already be highlighted when you pull this up. All right, so click on if your paragraph isn't highlighted here, then here's your HTML in your DevTools here. Find your paragraph in there and go ahead and click on that. And it will highlight and it will show us those different areas of the box model. And over here on is all of yours on the bottom like mine is? The DevTools. You can change how it's if you do this little meatball menu here, you can change if it's docked to the bottom or the right or the left, or you can pop it out to a separate window. It doesn't really matter, but I just wanted to. When I say on the right, I'm referring to this part. So it might be in a different section for you if you have this laid out differently. But anyway, find this area here where it has these tabs: rules, layout, computed, animations, and make sure you clicked on the layout tab. And this shows you your box model, and it shows the content, the padding, the border, and the margin. And so we can actually see on here that the padding is this like dark purple area around the text, and it tells us right here that we have 20 pixels of padding on each side. These dev tools are like a really, really, really super useful tool because it will happen a lot that there's like some space, then you're not sure what it is or where it came from or why it's there. You can always just, right click, inspect the element, just kind of hover around, and as you hover over these elements, the box model will be highlighted, and so you can find out exactly what that space is, where it's coming from, to be able to change that with your CSS. Okay, so really, really useful tool that you guys should be using a lot whenever you're trying to like debug the layout of your website. Okay. Any questions about anything so far? Yes, Cody. It's just the default. Yeah. Cool. Are you in Firefox? Yeah, you missed that when you came in late. So you make sure that you open the page in Firefox. Okay. All right. So one other thing I wanted to point out about the padding here is the color. The color is the same color as the background color. Okay, so basically you can think of the padding as just like transparent space. So it's going to show the background color. There's no way to like explicitly change the color of the padding. Like there's no like padding color property or anything like that. Okay, so there might be ways to kind of like hack it, and you can change like how far the background color extends, whether or not it extends into the padding with CSS. But you can't just say I want the padding to be red. Okay, so all right, so we saw that the padding has 20 pixels on every side. So this is our first example of what we call a shorthand property. This padding property is actually shorthand for 4 different properties: padding top, padding bottom, padding right, padding left. And we can set each one of those individually if we want. So let's say we wanted to have 30 pixels of padding on the top and 20 pixels of padding on the left. So we could do that like this: padding top, 30 pixels, padding left, 20 pixels. And it looks like that. Okay. You can actually do, well, so there's 4 different, you can do padding bottom, padding right, etc. What's sometimes easier is with the padding, with the padding property, you can specify multiple values. So if we want 30 pixels on the top and 20 on the left, we could do this: 30 pixels, 0, 0, 20 pixels. And it gives you the same result. Okay? And so what these numbers are, it goes clockwise from the top. So 30 pixels of padding on the top, 0 on the right, 0 on the bottom, and 20 pixels on the left. So we can, say we decide we actually do want some padding on the bottoms. So let's add 30 pixels there. So now 30 pixels on the top, 0 on the right, 30 on the bottom, 20 on the left. Top, right, bottom, left. That's something that you need to, that's one of the few things in CSS that you need to like memorize. Just clockwise from the top. Okay. Another way you can write a shorthand property is, let's say we have something like this, where 30 pixels on the top and the bottom, 20 pixels on the left and the right. We can actually just do the same thing like this. So with 2 values, the first value is for the top and the bottom, and the second value is for the left and the right. So do this however feels comfortable for you, whatever is the easiest way for you to remember. If you really makes sense to you and feels better to write out each property separately, fine. or if you can remember top right, bottom left, go with that. But there's actually another, you can have 3 values here, and I never remember, like, it's really hard for me to remember what the 3 different values mean, and so I just never do that. Okay, so it's a personal preference here. Whatever feels comfortable for you, go with that. But just know that there's always different ways to write this stuff. Okay. Any questions about padding? All right, I'm going to put back just the 20 pixel padding on all sides here. Let's talk about the next layer in the box model, which is border. Yes, good. Content, padding, border. All right. We created a border the other day. So let's go ahead and just put on a border here. Border. What are the values that we have to have here? What do we have to tell the browser about the border? So unlike padding, we can't like control the color of the padding or anything like that, or what it looks like beyond how big it is. With the border, we have more control over it, right? So what can we control with the border? Solid. Good. Okay, it's solid. What else? It's what? Okay, yeah. So there's different styles. So we've established we want it to be solid. What else do we have to say about it? Color. All right. I'm gonna go purple green. Have a nice like Hulk theme going here. So we have a solid green, and then what's the last thing we need to say about it? The size. So I'll go with 4 pixels. Solid green, 4 pixels. All right, and there's our border. Oh man, that's looking real ugly. I'm going to increase the size of my border just so it's easier to see on the projector. Okay. All right, so there we go. It's just another layer of space beyond the padding. We have more control over it though. We can say exactly how big it is, just like the padding, but we can also control the color and we control the style of it. So solid, you guys have thrown out some other options we have here. What else can we say besides solid? Dotted, which looks like that. Dashed, like that. Double, good, yeah, double, like that. Yeah, and then there's a couple that are like that 3D effect. Yes, inset, good. Inset, which gives like each side of the border like a different shade, so it's supposed to look 3-dimensional, I guess. And then outset, which is no. Class is ruined. Okay. Outset, thank you. So inset, one is supposed to look raised and one is supposed to look like indented, but
There's also one more, mixed.
mixed. What is mixed?
It's like a combination of like 3 different borders.
Okay, well that's not a value. We can't like put mixed in here. But you are.
That's when you combine. Actually, the mixed is
Yes, but you are right. That's where I was going next. Is that we'll get there. Give me a second. No, you're good. All right. So yes. So different styles of borders. There's only like a small list of options that you can put. It's not infinite. You can't just like make up new borders and right there. So we got solid, dotted, dashed, double inset outset.
You also got groove and ridge, which they
Gro-
just make them look sharper, essentially.
Groove.
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay, it's like a combination of and ridge.
And then ridge, I think, just makes it a little more fancy.
Yeah, like well, I think like it looks like groove is supposed to look like it's like pointed inward, and then ridge looks like it's like pointed up like that. Okay, these are all real ugly that you should probably like never actually use. The inset and outset and groove and ridge. Yeah. All right. Let's just pretend like those don't exist. You can actually use an image as a border, so that's like the one way that you can like create your own custom borders with a border image. All right, so I'm going to go back to solid here. We talked about color the other day. You know, any color value you could put in here, hexadecimal or whatever. Any length value here, and these three values can actually be in any order. So we could say 10 pixel solid green, and it would still work. Okay, so the order doesn't matter. Sometimes the order does matter with other properties, but for this one it doesn't. Okay, so to get to what Cody was talking about, so we saw that padding is a shorthand for padding top, padding bottom, whatever. Border is like a shorthand of a shorthand. So we can actually separate these out into three separate properties: border color, border style, and border width. Border, I think it's border width. I don't know. It's one of those things that I never actually do. So, yeah, border width. So we could, instead of this, we could say border width 10 pixels, border style solid, border color green. So it's a shorthand property, but it's also shorthand for border top, border right, border bottom, border left, just like padding. So we could have different styles, different sizes, different colors of borders on each side. Or we could say, you know what, we only want a border on the bottom. So we'll just change that to border bottom, and now we just got a bottom border. And we could say border left, 20 pixels, solid yellow, so we can begin to make the ugliest website that has ever existed.
You can also use different border styles.
Yes, we can use, but yeah, exactly. You can say, you can. Each border can be completely different in every way. All right. It's actually kind of starting to look cool, but
It's starting to have a style.
let's just not talk about it. So what was I going with that? I was gonna say that you might notice that these different styles of borders look different in different browsers, and there's nothing you can do about that. There's no way to control that other than, like, if you really, really want it to look the same in every single browser, you'd have to use an image, but that's, silly. So, yeah, a dotted border is going to look different in Firefox than it does in Chrome. That's just the way it is. You just got to learn to live with that kind of stuff as a web developer, that you don't have total control over how things look. All right. Any border questions? All right. So let's look at our final element here, margin. Margin you can think of as the space between elements. So if we add let's at this point I want to do things differently for the H1 of the paragraph. So let's actually create a new rule just for the paragraph. And I'm going to say margin. This is very much like padding. We can put in one value and it'll apply that value to all four sides. Or we can say margin top, margin left. We can use the 2 value, the 4 value version. So let's just try margin. Let's put 40 pixels on all sides of the paragraph. So that gives you extra space around the paragraph, between the paragraph and the heading. Okay? Makes sense? Pretty straightforward. Again, same as the padding. We could separate it out into different values for the 4 different sides. One interesting thing that you should know about is this. Let's go ahead and also add 40 pixels of margin to the H1. And then refresh your page and pay attention to the space between the paragraph and the heading. So we have 40 pixels on all sides of the paragraph, and we have 40 pixels on all sides of the heading. So that space in between, you might think it should be 80 because you have 40 on the bottom of the H1 and you have 40 at the top of the paragraph. So that's our hypothesis. There's going to be 80 pixels between them. Let's refresh our page, pay attention to that space, and see what happens. Nothing. Okay, we got padding, we got margin around the other sides of the H1, but the space between the H1 and the paragraph stayed the same. Okay, so this is called margin collapsing. I'll write it. Margin collapsing. When two margins are like taking up the same space, then they collapse. So like, you have the margin top of the paragraph, you have the margin bottom of the H1. Those are in the same space between those two elements, and so they don't add up. They just take up that same amount of space, okay? So if we change this value to 60 pixels, what do you think is going to happen? Yeah, it's going to add more space. And how much will it be? It'll be 60 pixels. It'll be 20 more than what we had, 60 pixels. So, boop, there we go. Yeah, so when you have two margins taking up like that same space, it's just like whichever is the bigger margin is what the actual amount of space will be, okay? That's something that can really trip you up if you're like, I need more space, so let me make this 50 pixels. And then like, what the hell? Nothing happened. My entire page is broken. No, you just have collapsing margins, okay? Again, best way to debug that kind of thing is to go into your dev tools and actually hover over these things and see that yellow space, the yellow border around that is the margin area. Okay. So check this out. Now, since we're in our dev tools, I'm clicking on the body here, and if I look over here at the box model, the body has a margin of 8 pixels on all sides. What's up with that? we didn't apply any margin to the body, right? Well, if we delete the margins that we applied to our H1 in our paragraph, and refresh, they have space between them too, right? So margin is something that browsers by default just automatically put around elements. So there is a default in Firefox 16 pixels of margin on the top and the bottom of the paragraph. And on the H1, there's a margin of evidently 21.4333 pixels of margin on the top and the bottom of the H1, and 8 pixels all the way on all sides of the board of the body. Okay, so the browser applies some of this stuff by default without you actually doing it yourself. Some people like to get rid of all that. So there's something called a CSS reset. A CSS reset is like a style sheet that somebody else has written that you can just like copy and paste into the top of your style sheet that basically undoes all of those default margins and everything that the browser adds and tries to make everything consistent across all browsers. So we're not going to really like be using CSS resets like that much. You can, use them if you'd like on your own, but we're going to be doing regularly probably a couple things. One of those things is that you might want to just zero out your margins. So you might see people do something like this. I don't know if this is the best practice way of doing it, but margin 0, this little asterisk means select everything. It's called the universal selector. It selects every single element on the page. So you can select every single element, give it a margin of 0 to eliminate all of that default margin that the browser gives. So then our default page is going to look like this, okay? And which looks bad, but then you can go you can go down here below this and then add your margin however you want it manually. Like so, okay? This kind of brings up a good point about CSS, the concept of when we say margin 20 pixels down here on the H1, up here we've told it to have a margin of 0. So whatever is the I'm not sure if I'm honestly not sure what the specificity of this selector is. There's a concept called specificity, which we'll get to later. But let's say that, just for example, we say up here H1 should have a margin of 0. And then down here we say H1 should have a margin of 20 pixels. Which one is going to actually be applied? It's the 20 pixels. Yeah, it's assuming the selectors have the same specificity, which again, we'll talk about that later, but assuming they have the same specificity, then whichever one was applied last, lower in the spreadsheet, will be the one that actually gets applied. So even though we're saying margin 0 up here, down here, this one is going to take precedence. All right. So one last part of this before we get to the exercise. We talked about content, padding, border, margin. let's talk about actually changing the size of the box, the whole box itself, right? We can use the width property. We did this the other day in class. Width, you can put any length value here, so a percentage or a pixel value. So let's say we make this width of 500 pixels. Okay, so that adjusts the length of the entire box. How that width is actually calculated is something we'll get into a little bit later. But when we do pixel values, just be aware that that is a hard value. So if our browser is less than 500 pixels wide, then that element gets cut off and we get this horizontal scroll bar. If instead we use a percentage value, then it's going to be fluid. It's always going to be 50% of the width, and it won't get cut off. Okay. I'll show you one more trick, and then we'll get to the exercise. What if we want to center this on the page? How would you do that? Okay, you might think, all right, I want to center this H1, so I'm going to apply text align center, but up. Okay, text align centers the text within its content box. It doesn't center the box itself relative to its parent. So to center the box, what you need to do is actually use margin. So I already have a margin property here. So margin, let's say, okay, 20 pixels. So I'm going to put 20 pixels on the top and the bottom. And on the left and right, I'm going to use this value auto. Boop, and that gives us magically gives us a centered box. Basically what's going on there, the auto value, it says, okay, whatever available space there is total on the horizontal axis, take that available space and evenly divide it between the left and the right side, which effectively centers the element. So again, another way to write this would be like this. So you have 20 pixels on the top, auto on right, 20 on bottom, and auto on left. It's the same thing as that two-value version I just had. So as long as you have auto on the left and right, however you want to write that, then that will work to center the element. All right. Cool. Let's get into the assignments. One is an exercise that's going to take up the rest of the time. The other is a take-home assignment. So let me go over the take-home assignment first, just so we don't run out of time to do that. So on Canvas, you will find, this is the one that was mistakenly set to be due today. It's actually due Tuesday. It's the coded number 2. Do you guys remember, this was like a year ago, when in Hawaii there was like a false like nuclear disaster alarm that like freaked everyone out? Okay, so there were screenshots going around the internet of what the interface for that looked like. Like the person sitting on the computer that clicks the button to send it was supposed to be like a test, right? But they sent like the actual, like, there is a nuclear disaster happening. So they sent, they showed like a screenshot of what that interface looked like, and if this page ever loads. All right. And so I recreated that with HTML. So it looks something like this. So you can kind of imagine how it would be easy to make a mistake and click the wrong thing here, right? So what I want you to do is use your design skills, your design intuition, and use HTML to, the HTML is already written for you, but you can rearrange stuff. You can rewrite how things are written. You can add headings to like separate things into categories. And then use CSS to design this some way to try to make it less likely that somebody's going to click the wrong button. Okay? So this is an exercise not only in like practicing with HTML and CSS, but also just thinking about design, thinking about usability, user interfaces, and how you can use design to make people's jobs easier, make people's lives better. So, how could you use the box model? How could you use, all the different like ways of styling text to make sure that people can easily tell the difference between like the test alert and the like this is a real thing. Does that make sense? Okay, good. All right, so for now, for the exercise, which unfortunately since I took so much time setting up the recording equipment, we only have 10 minutes, but we'll do what we can here. The exercise is this one. So go ahead and pull that up. My computer's being really, really slow. Basically, you're going to recreate the page. So you can this is a link that you can download. Download that HTML file. Some of the colors and stuff are already done for you, and then you just need to adjust the padding, border, margin, and width to make each of those elements look like they do in the picture. Okay? So give that a shot. And I'm going to end the recording.